In the summer of 1950, a small but determined American unit called Task Force Smith found itself on the front line of the first confrontation against North Korea. This clash occurred at the beginning of the Korean War, pitting the poorly equipped American troops against the relentless advance of North Korean forces. Task Force Smith, with its outdated equipment and comprised mainly of inexperienced recruits, faced an enormous challenge with impressive determination. To stop the column of North Korean tanks, armed with powerful Soviet T-34 divided by 85s. The outcome of this historic encounter would not only test the courage of these soldiers, but also set the stage for a series of tumultuous events that would shape the course of the Korean War. On the night of June 25, 1950, the Korean peninsula was plunged into chaos. 10 divisions of the North Korean People's Army, KPA, launched a full-scale invasion against the South, the Republic of Korea. With a force of about 90,000 soldiers advancing in 6 columns, the surprise attack caught the South Korean forces off guard and ill-prepared. The 38,000 South Korean soldiers, disorganized and lacking equipment, offered little resistance. The numerically superior North Korean forces quickly overwhelmed isolated groups of South Korean soldiers along the front lines, advancing relentlessly southward. The scene was one of tension and suspense, with each move potentially changing the fate of the peninsula. The South Korean forces, fighting with everything they had, faced a relentless enemy, and the determination of Task Force Smith would be crucial in the days to come, as the world watched anxiously the unfolding of this historic battle. Most of the South Korean units were forced to retreat, and on June 28, the North Koreans took control of Seoul, the capital of South Korea, forcing the government and its already weakened army to retreat further south. To prevent the total collapse of South Korea, the United Nations Security Council decided to act, voting to send military forces to aid the besieged nation. The U.S. 7th Fleet, led by Task Force 77 and the aircraft carrier USS Valley Forge, was dispatched, while the British Far East Fleet sent several ships, including the HMS Triumph, to provide crucial air and naval support. Despite naval blockades and aerial attempts to slow the North Korean advance, it quickly became clear that this would not be enough to stop the relentless march of the KPA. After the end of World War II, President Harry Truman and Secretary of Defense Lewis Johnson took significant steps to reduce military spending. These reductions greatly impacted American forces in Asia, especially those involved in occupation duties. As a result, the troops were ill-prepared and lacked essential resources for extensive military exercises. Instead of being a robust defensive force against communist threats, they resembled more of a police unit. Thus, on June 25, 1950, North Korea launched a surprise invasion of South Korea with a well-equipped and superior force, catching its southern neighbor and the United States completely off guard. Even so, President Truman, with his strategic vision, saw the Korean conflict as an opportunity to contain communist expansion and demonstrate America's unwavering commitment to protecting nations threatened by stronger communist neighbors. His determination led to the deployment of American forces to South Korea under the banner of a United Nations resolution. The absence of the Soviet Union in the UN Security Council vote was crucial in facilitating this measure, paving the way for American involvement in the Korean War. General Douglas MacArthur, an experienced military strategist, strongly recommended sending air, land, and naval forces to assist the beleaguered Republic of Korea, whose ROK army was struggling to repel the North Korean advance. Amidst this tumultuous scenario, a unit known as Task Force Smith, part of the 24th Infantry Division, was selected to be sent to South Korea. Facing a desperate situation, Major General William F. Dean, the division commander, made the tough decision to deploy the 1st Battalion of the 24th Infantry Division. He chose this unit because its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bradford Smith, had the most combat experience, having fought in the Battle of Guadalcanal during World War II. In March 1950, Smith's battalion achieved the highest score among all units in Japan during a tactical test. This achievement was impressive, but they had no idea that their readiness would soon be put to the test. Task Force Smith was chosen because it was the unit of the 24th Infantry Division closest to Korea and had a strong sense of unity. At least on paper, TF Smith was ready. Despite limited training resources due to budget constraints while stationed in Japan, they received unexpected orders on June 30, 1950, to move to South Korea. They were to fly across the Sea of Japan to assist the South Korean forces that had abandoned Seoul and were retreating. The mission was clear: block the advance of the North Korean forces and hold the line until the rest of the division could be transported by sea to South Korea. The battalion would be carried by C-54 Skymaster transport aircraft. Brigadier General John H. Church presented the mission as providing moral support to the Koreans and casually told Smith, "All we need is some men up there who won't run when they see tanks." Little did they know their actions had a greater purpose. General Douglas MacArthur, the supreme commander of American forces in the Far East, had grander plans. He saw Task Force Smith as an opportunity for a bold show of force, although this wasn't apparent to the soldiers at the time. The stage was set for the Battle of Ozen. The battle began on July 5th, when T.F. Smith encountered the first North Korean tanks. Around 7:30 a.m., a column of 33 tanks advanced down the highway, but these were no ordinary tanks. They were Soviet-made T-34s, the same machines that had been crucial in the defeat of Nazi Germany during World War II. As they approached, the American howitzers opened fire when the enemy tanks were about 4,000 meters away. Despite their limited resources, T.F. Smith faced the enemy with small arms, bazookas, and recoilless rifles. However, their weaponry was largely ineffective against the armor of the North Korean tanks, which continued to advance relentlessly. The tension increased with every second, as the small American unit desperately tried to stop the powerful advance of the enemy tanks. The suspense was palpable, with each soldier knowing that their next move could be decisive for the battle's outcome. And so, amidst the chaos and danger, the determination and courage of T.F. Smith were put to the test, leaving an indelible mark on the history of the Korean War. The artillery shells fired by the Americans bounced harmlessly off the steel armor of the T-34s. Second Lieutenant Ollie Connor, in an act of bravery, fired 22 bazooka rockets at a T-34 only 15 meters away, but watched them ricochet without causing any damage. The battle quickly intensified, compromising T.F. Smith's defenses. The lack of effective anti-tank weapons and poor communication with the artillery left T.F. Smith in a disadvantageous position. By around 10 a.m., the column of North Korean tanks had crossed the highway, cutting through Smith's defensive position and continued south. The American gunners managed to destroy 2 tanks and disable 2 more, but this exhausted all 6 of the task force's anti-tank rounds, leaving them without means to pierce the T-34's armor. T.F. Smith faced the tanks head-on and did not retreat, but they learned the hard way that they were powerless against such heavily armored adversaries. The enemy cut the communication wires between the infantry and artillery units, overran the artillery positions, and inflicted an unknown number of casualties, leaving the task force severely weakened. As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, an even more threatening sight appeared on the horizon: another enemy military column approaching, with tanks and a wave of infantry stretching for 6 miles. T.F. Smith quickly initiated their defensive maneuvers, unleashing a barrage of fire on the advancing North Korean forces. The tension was palpable. Every soldier knew the battle was far from over and that the enemy would show no mercy. Despite the desperate circumstances, the task force fought with all the courage they had, knowing that their actions could decide the fate of South Korea. The determination not to retreat, even in the face of a relentless enemy, made each moment fraught with suspense and emotion. The fight for survival and victory continued, with every shot fired and every move made in a deadly dance of courage and resilience. However, the harsh reality set in quickly. In just half an hour, the situation deteriorated drastically. The North Korean tanks relentlessly attacked T.F. Smith's positions with continuous machine gun and cannon fire, while the agile enemy infantry flanked the positions, taking strategic points on both sides of the defensive line. By mid-afternoon, the circumstances had become unsustainable. Communication lines with the artillery were cut, making it impossible to call for reinforcements. Surrounded and besieged, T.F. Smith faced the grim reality of complete annihilation. The semblance of confidence that General MacArthur hoped to maintain dissipated in the face of this overwhelming threat. The harsh reality drove many soldiers to despair, resulting in desertions. Outnumbered and without adequate armament, Smith had no choice but to order a strategic withdrawal. This meant leaving behind fallen comrades, wounded soldiers, and their valuable howitzers. By the end of the day, the outcome of the battle was devastating. The retreat was tumultuous and chaotic, with some soldiers abandoning their heavy weapons and wounded comrades in their desperate flight. The Battle of Ozen marked the beginning of the U.S. ground involvement in the conflict. This initial confrontation highlighted the vulnerabilities of the American forces at the start of the war. Obsolete equipment proved inadequate against the North Korean armor, and the relatively inexperienced and poorly trained American units were outmatched by the well-prepared North Korean troops. The substantial numerical advantage of the North Korean troops was also crucial to the battle's outcome. The undisciplined American troops prematurely abandoned their positions, leaving behind equipment and wounded comrades to be captured by the North Koreans. General Smith, in retrospect, admitted that he had stayed in position too long, allowing the North Korean troops to encircle the American force, resulting in substantial casualties during the retreat. These vulnerabilities persisted in subsequent engagements with other American units over the next month, as the North Korean forces continued to advance. The North Korean advance continued unabated for weeks, setting a grim tone for the early phases of the conflict. Despite the significant defeat, Task Force Smith managed to fulfill its mission of delaying the North Korean forces' advance for several hours. The sacrifice of these soldiers, despite the desperate circumstances, left an indelible mark and demonstrated the determination and courage that would become defining characteristics of future combats in the Korean War. During the battle, the 34th Infantry Regiment of the 24th Infantry Division was positioned in Pyeong-taek, 24 kilometers to the south, but also faced a harsh defeat in the Battle of Pyeong-taek. In the following month, the 24th Infantry Division fought several battles in an attempt to slow the advance of the North Korean forces, facing challenges similar to the previous ones. Within a week, the division was forced to retreat and ended up being defeated again in the Battle of Taejon. The North Korean forces consistently dominated the U.S. troops, pushing the 8th Army back to Pusan. It was here that the crucial Battle of the Pusan Perimeter unfolded, culminating in the eventual defeat of the North Korean Army. In the years following the Korean War, the U.S. Army transformed Task Force Smith's training areas in Japan into a memorial. A monument honoring T.F. Smith was also erected on the battlefield of Ozen. The 8th Army, which maintains its headquarters in South Korea, holds an annual commemoration of the Battle of Ozen. On July 16, 2010, exactly 60 years after the Battle of Ozen, the leaders of the 8th Army, in conjunction with officials from the Ozen government, organized a ceremony. They honored Task Force Smith and described their involvement as the first shots of a war of ideas that exists to this day. The battle that began with Task Force Smith served as a grim prelude to the challenges that would follow. Each defeat and retreat revealed the determination of the American forces to learn and adapt. The memory of these initial battles remains alive, reminding us of the sacrifice and courage of the soldiers who faced the impossible with bravery. The annual commemorations and the monument in Ozen not only honor the fallen soldiers, but also serve as a reminder of the resilience and courage shown in moments of despair. The Battle of Ozen, with all its challenges and sacrifices, marked the beginning of a prolonged conflict, the repercussions of which would be felt for decades. After the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter, American forces and their allies finally managed to turn the tide. Through a combination of strategic reinforcements, tactical improvements, and the implementation of new technologies, they began to reclaim lost ground. Operation Chromite, the daring amphibious landing at Incheon led by General MacArthur, was a crucial turning point, allowing UN forces to recapture Seoul and push the North Korean troops back beyond the 38th parallel. But the war was far from over. With Chinese intervention in late 1950, the conflict intensified further, transforming into a brutal struggle of advances and retreats. Subsequent battles tested the determination and resilience of soldiers on both sides, with severe weather conditions and treacherous terrain adding an extra layer of difficulty to the combat. With each battle, the lessons learned at Ozan and other earlier fronts influenced the strategies and tactics adopted. The troops, now more experienced and better equipped, faced the enemy with a deeper understanding of the complexities of the Korean theater of operations. The war of attrition continued, with both sides suffering heavy casualties, but failing to secure a decisive victory. Meanwhile, on the political front, armistice negotiations began to take shape. The leaders of the involved nations increasingly recognized the need to seek a diplomatic solution to avoid further escalation of the conflict. The negotiations, however, would be long and complex, reflecting the depth of the ideological and territorial divisions between the belligerents. Amid this tension, the memory of the initial confrontations and the heroic battles fought by units like Task Force Smith continued to inspire the soldiers. The determination shown by these pioneers served as an example to all who fought in the harsh trenches of Korea. The suspense and uncertainty of the future loomed over every strategic move and decision made on the battlefield and at the negotiating tables. The Korean War, with its ups and downs, moved towards an uncertain future, where the sacrifice and bravery of the early combatants would never be forgotten. As armistice negotiations intensified, the battles in the field slowly diminished, leading to a ceasefire in July 1953. Although the war did not officially end, the Korean Armistice Agreement brought temporary relief to the conflict, establishing the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, that still divides the two Koreas today. The memories of the battles and the sacrifices made by soldiers like those of Task Force Smith remain etched in history. Their acts of courage and determination have served as an inspiration not only to the military, but also to future generations, who have learned about the resilience and bravery displayed in those critical moments. The monument in Ozan and the annual commemorations continue to be a fitting tribute to those who fought and died, reminding everyone of the importance of honoring the past while building a better future. The history of the Korean War, with all its complexities and lessons, remains relevant today, teaching us about the cost of freedom and the importance of peace. And if you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about the events that shaped the world, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our War History channel. Here, we delve into the fascinating details of epic battles, military strategies, and the heroes who made a difference. Your subscription helps us continue bringing more informative and exciting content to you. Until next time.